I've heard the sound of this server room for 9 years, through 3 acquisitions, 2 platform overhauls, and 1 complete architectural rebuild. The cooling system never changes pitch. It's the only honest thing left at Nerve Technologies. My access badge still works. For now. I used to run point on every critical migration. Database transitions, cloud integrations, legacy system decommissions. If it touched production data, it went through my review process first. The junior developers called me the safety net. Irritating nickname, but accurate. I caught the errors that would have cost millions. I documented the edge cases that kept systems breathing through peak loads. Past tense feels wrong in my mouth, but I'm practicing. Talia Grimshaw became our engineering lead 6 months ago. She came from a startup that got acqui-hired, one of those places where everyone wore hoodies and talked about disrupting industries they didn't understand. Her interviews went well enough, she knew the buzzwords, had opinions about Kubernetes orchestration, understood the difference between horizontal and vertical scaling. On paper, she looked like someone who could guide our division through modernization. The first warning sign was small. She stopped CCING me on architecture review emails. Not a dramatic exclusion, just a gradual fade. Threads I used to anchor simply started without me. When I asked about it, she smiled and said, just trying to reduce noise in everyone's inbox. You know how it gets. I did know. I also knew what signal-to-noise ratios actually meant in communications theory, and this wasn't that. The second sign was the Tuesday morning stand-up where she reassigned the CloudFront CDN configuration to Liam Hayes, a developer who'd been with us for 8 months. Good kid, sharp enough, but he'd never touched our content delivery infrastructure before. I'd built that system across 4 geographic regions with failover protocols that required understanding our customer access patterns during both normal operations and denial of service attacks. Liam's hungry to grow, Talia announced to the team. We need to start distributing institutional knowledge instead of hoarding it. Hoarding. That was the word she chose. I didn't argue in the meeting. I pinged Liam afterward, offered to walk him through the monitoring dashboards and the runbooks for when traffic spikes hit. He seemed grateful, maybe a little embarrassed. He knew the optics. Everyone did. The database migration project started as a bullet point in a quarterly planning document. We'd been running on a hybrid system, some data in our legacy on-premise PostgreSQL clusters, some in Aurora instances on AWS, with a complex replication scheme I'd designed to ensure zero downtime during the transition period. The plan was methodical: migrate table by table, validate data integrity at each step, maintain dual-write capabilities until we confirmed the cloud systems could handle our actual load patterns, not just the theoretical ones from capacity planning. I'd spent 6 weeks drafting the migration specification. 347 pages covering schema translations, index rebuilding strategies, foreign key constraint handling, stored procedure conversions, and rollback procedures for every single phase. I'd modeled our data access patterns across 18 months of query logs. I knew which tables could tolerate eventual consistency and which ones required immediate read-after-write guarantees. I knew where the orphaned records were, the legacy columns that existed only because some sales engineer promised a client a custom feature in 2019, the materialized views that got refreshed on schedules nobody remembered the reason for anymore. Talia scheduled a one-on-one with me on a Thursday afternoon. Her office still smelled like fresh paint, she'd had it redone in gray and white, very minimalist, very design thinking. There was a poster on the wall about failing fast that made me want to fail slowly and carefully out of her line of sight. Adele, I want to talk about the database migration. Sure. I sent over the updated timeline yesterday. We're ready to start the first phase next week if infrastructure approves I'm moving you off the project. The sentence landed like a disconnected packet. I waited for the retry, the correction, but she just looked at me with that same boardroom smile. I'm assigning it to Terrence Wu. He's more cloud native than you. She laughed when she said it. Not cruel, exactly. More like she'd made a clever observation at a networking mixer and expected me to appreciate the insight. Cloud native. Terrence had 2 years of experience. He'd worked at a company that ran everything on Firebase and called it serverless architecture. He'd never debugged a connection pool exhaustion issue at 3 in the morning. He'd never recovered data from a corrupted replica. He'd never explained to a panicked CEO why eventual consistency meant exactly what it said and why their quick question about real-time reporting had a multi-million-dollar infrastructure answer. Terrence is talented, I said, keeping my voice level. But he hasn't worked with our data model. The migration spec assumes knowledge of our historical decisions. That's exactly the problem. We're too anchored to historical decisions. We need fresh eyes, Adele. People who aren't emotionally attached to the old way of doing things. Emotionally attached to database schemas and replication topology. What do you want me to work on instead? I'm thinking internal tooling. Developer experience improvements. Maybe some documentation cleanup. Documentation cleanup. 9 years of architecture expertise reassigned to fixing typos in README files. I walked out of her office. I didn't slam the door. I didn't send an angry email. I went back to my desk, opened a new document, and titled it Migration Observation Log, Private. Then I started watching. Terrence announced the new migration plan in a team-wide email 3 days later. He'd condensed my 347 pages into a 6-slide deck with lots of icons of clouds and arrows. The core strategy was something he called lift and shift plus optimization. We'd move everything to AWS in one coordinated cutover weekend, then iterate on performance afterward. No dual write period. No table-by-table validation. No rollback procedures beyond restore from backup, which assumed the backups would be consistent and complete, which assumed someone had tested the restoration process, which nobody had. I didn't object in the email thread. I opened my private log and wrote, Day 1, migration plan eliminates validation phases. Single cutover event scheduled. No data integrity verification between phases because there are no phases. During lunch, I sat with Yuki Tanaka from the platform team. She'd been at Nerve for 11 years, longer than me, and had the kind of institutional memory that made her dangerous to ignore and impossible to fire. You see Terrence's migration plan? She asked, keeping her voice low. I saw it. It's going to fail. You know that, right? Probably. And you're just going to let it happen? I looked at her. Really looked at her. Yuki had survived 3 rounds of layoffs, 2 CEOs, and 1 hostile takeover attempt. She knew how these things worked. What would you do? I asked. I'd document everything. I'd make sure my objections were on record. I'd cover my ass so thoroughly that when it implodes, nobody can say I didn't warn them. Smart advice. Safe advice. The kind of thing that keeps you employed but doesn't actually fix anything. I'll think about it, I said. What I thought about was this: documentation doesn't stop disasters. It just proves you predicted them. And proving you were right after everything burns down is a cold comfort when you're explaining to customers why their data is gone. I started spending more time in the office after hours. Not in an obvious way, I'd leave at my normal time, then come back around 8 or 9 when most people had cleared out. The security guards knew me. I'd been doing late-night deployment support for years. Nobody questioned it. I wasn't sabotaging anything. I want to be clear about that. I was observing. And preparing. I set up monitoring on our production database clusters that ran parallel to the official monitoring but logged to a separate system I controlled. Nothing that would alert anyone, just quiet collection of metrics, query patterns, connection counts, replication lag, transaction rates, error frequencies. I configured it to snapshot the data every 15 minutes and store it in a private S3 bucket I'd created under my personal AWS account for research purposes. In my observation log, I noted every meeting about the migration. Talia had started excluding me from those too, but Yuki attended most of them and she'd grab coffee with me afterward, casual-like, and mention things. Terrence wants to disable the foreign key constraints during the migration, she told me one afternoon. Says it'll speed up the data transfer. I wrote it down. Disabling foreign key constraints meant we'd lose referential integrity checks. Data could get written to child tables that pointed to parent records that didn't exist anymore. Orphans. Thousands of them, probably. Maybe millions, depending on what failed during the move. He mentioned how he plans to validate afterward? I asked. Yuki shook her head. He said something about eventual consistency and self-healing systems. Self-healing. That phrase was doing a lot of work for someone who'd never actually built a self-healing system. I added another note, day 12, FK constraints to be disabled. No validation strategy. Risk of permanent referential integrity loss across core transactional tables. The migration was scheduled for a weekend, Saturday night through Sunday morning, with Monday as a buffer day just in case. Terrence sent around a battle plan email that read like a product launch announcement. Lots of exclamation points. Lots of confidence about seamless transition and minimal disruption. I read it carefully. He'd assigned himself to lead the cutover. Liam would handle the data transfer scripts. A contractor named Fiona Branch, someone I'd never worked with, was supposedly managing the validation checks, though her scope of work just said post-migration testing without specifying what that meant. Nobody was assigned to rollback procedures. Because there were no rollback procedures. Because you can't roll back from a cliff after you've already jumped. On Friday afternoon, Talia stopped by my desk. I was working on a pull request for an internal API, legitimate work, the kind of thing you do when you've been reassigned to developer experience improvements. Big weekend, she said, leaning against my cubicle wall. You going to stick around for the migration? Wasn't planning on it. I'm not on the team anymore. Right. Just thought you might want to see how it goes. You put a lot of work into the early planning. Early planning. Like I'd sketched out some preliminary ideas that other people were now executing properly. I'm sure it'll go fine, I said. She smiled. Terrence really knows his stuff. Fresh perspective, you know? Cloud native, I said. Exactly. After she left, I added to my log, day 17, Friday before migration weekend. Lead engineer expressed confidence. No contingency planning visible. No disaster recovery procedures in place beyond standard backup restoration, which has not been tested at scale. I didn't go into the office on Saturday. I did, however, configure alerts on my personal monitoring system. If database error rates spiked above normal thresholds, I'd get a text message. If replication lag exceeded 5 minutes, I'd get an email. If connection pool utilization hit 90%, my laptop would ping. I spent Saturday morning hiking. Cell signal was spotty, which was fine. I wasn't expecting problems yet. The actual cutover wouldn't start until 8 p.m., and the first few hours would just be shutting down the old systems and starting the data transfer. Problems would emerge later, during validation, when someone actually tried to use the migrated data. Except there was no validation phase. So problems would emerge Monday morning when employees tried to log in and customers tried to place orders and the entire system discovered that its data had been partially corrupted during a migration executed by someone who thought foreign key constraints were optional features. My phone buzzed at 9:47 p.m. Error rate spike. I checked the monitoring dashboard on my laptop. Transaction rollback percentage had jumped from 0.3% to 12%. That was bad. That meant something in the migration was causing data conflicts that the database was automatically rejecting. I didn't call anyone. I took a screenshot and saved it to my log. At 11:23 p.m., another alert. Connection pool exhaustion on 3 of the 6 database replicas. The migration scripts were probably opening connections without closing them properly, a classic mistake. After enough hours, you run out of available connections and the database starts rejecting new queries entirely. Screenshot. Log entry. No intervention. I went to bed around midnight. My phone continued buzzing periodically. I silenced it and slept reasonably well. Sunday morning brought 17 new alerts. I made coffee and reviewed them systematically. Replication lag on the read replicas had ballooned to 43 minutes. Error rates were holding steady around 15%. And someone, probably Terrence in a panic, had disabled query logging entirely, which meant they were flying blind now. Disabling query logging during a critical migration. That was like turning off your car's dashboard lights because the check engine warning was annoying. My phone actually rang at 2:34 p.m. Sunday afternoon. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. 2 minutes later, it rang again. Same number. I answered. Adele? It's Terrence. Hey, sorry to bother you on the weekend, but we're seeing some weird behavior with the database and I know you have a lot of history with this stuff, so I was wondering if you might have some time to look at something? Weird behavior. 15% transaction failure rates constituted weird behavior. What kind of weird behavior? Just some inconsistencies. Like, we're seeing error messages about missing records, but the data transfer logs show everything copied successfully. I think it might be a caching issue? Not a caching issue. Referential integrity violations from disabling foreign key constraints. Child records pointing to parent records that never made it across during the transfer, probably because they got filtered out by some poorly written where clause in the migration script. Have you checked the foreign key constraints? I asked. We disabled those for the migration. They were slowing things down. Right. And did you re-enable them afterward? Pause. Long pause. We're planning to do that during the optimization phase next week. Next week. He was planning to run production systems for a week without referential integrity constraints, just hoping nothing broke too badly. Terrence, if you re-enable foreign key constraints now, the database is going to reject them. You have orphaned records. Thousands of them, probably. Oh. Another pause. Can we clean those up somehow? Could we? Yes, technically. Would it require days of careful analysis to identify all the orphaned records, determine which ones were supposed to exist and which were errors, and then either fix the parent relationships or delete the children? Also yes. It's complicated, I said. You'd need to analyze the referential integrity across every table relationship to determine what's missing and why. Could you help with that? I know you're not on the project anymore, but this seems like it might need your expertise. My expertise. The expertise that was apparently less valuable than being cloud native. I'm actually out of town this weekend, I lied. Family thing. I can take a look on Monday when I'm back in the office. Monday might be too late. We're supposed to go live for employees first thing Monday morning. Then you should probably roll back to the old system. Talia said rollback isn't an option. We've already decommissioned the old servers. Of course she had. Because nothing says competence in your migration plan like burning the boats before confirming the new island is actually habitable. Then I don't know what to tell you, Terrence. You're going to have to work through it. I hung up. I felt bad for maybe 3 seconds. Terrence was in over his head, but that wasn't my fault. He'd accepted an assignment he wasn't qualified for, and Talia had given it to him knowing he wasn't qualified for it, and now they were both learning what expertise actually meant. I added to my log, day 18, Sunday afternoon. Database errors confirmed during migration execution. Foreign key constraints disabled without re-enablement plan. Referential integrity compromised across unknown number of tables. Rollback impossible due to premature infrastructure decommissioning. Projected Monday morning system failure, high probability. Then I poured another coffee and enjoyed the rest of my Sunday. Monday morning, I dressed carefully. Professional but not formal. I wanted to look competent, not like I was attending a funeral, even though I kind of was. I arrived at the office at 8:15 a.m. The lobby was chaos. People clustered around laptops, talking in urgent voices. I caught fragments, can't log in, customer data missing, sales team is freaking out. I badged through security and took the elevator to the 4th floor. Our division occupied the entire east wing, mostly open floor plan with conference rooms around the perimeter. Every conference room was full. Yuki intercepted me at my desk. Where the hell have you been? It's 8:15. I'm early. The system's been down since 6 a.m. Nobody can access customer records. The sales dashboard is showing data from March. March, Adele. March. That was interesting. They must have hit a backup restoration attempt that only partially succeeded, pulling data from the last known good backup but failing to apply all the incremental updates since then. Classic disaster recovery failure mode. Is Talia here? I asked. Conference room C. She's been in there with Terrence and the VP of Engineering since dawn. I dropped my bag at my desk and walked to conference room C. The door was closed, but the walls were glass. I could see Talia pacing while Terrence sat hunched over a laptop. A man I didn't recognize, probably the VP, stood with his arms crossed, face grim. I knocked. Talia looked up, saw me, and for a fraction of a second, I saw real fear in her eyes. Then the mask came back up, professional, controlled, fake. She opened the door. Adele. Good. We need you. I heard there were some issues with the migration. Issues is putting it mildly. The system is completely corrupted. We're locked out of production. Customer data is inconsistent. We need to fix this immediately. I stepped into the conference room. The VP turned to look at me. He was older, probably early 60s, with the kind of gray hair that suggested distinguished competence rather than age. You're Adel Watson? He asked. Yes, sir. Glenn Rourke. VP of Engineering. I understand you designed the original migration plan before being reassigned. That's correct. And you're not currently on the migration team? No, sir. I was moved to developer experience tooling about 3 weeks ago. His eyes flicked to Talia. Something passed between them, some unspoken communication that suggested this conversation had been happening before I arrived. Can you fix this? He asked me directly. Could I? Probably. Would it be easy? Absolutely not. I'd need to assess the damage first. Understand what data was corrupted, what's missing, what's inconsistent. Then I'd need to determine if we can restore from backups or if we need to rebuild the referential integrity manually. How long would that take? Days. Maybe a week, depending on how bad it is. Talia made a noise, something between a laugh and a gasp. We can't be down for a week. We'll lose millions. Customers will leave. Then you should have validated the migration before going live, I said. I kept my voice neutral, factual. Not angry. Just true. Glenn looked at Talia. Why wasn't there a validation phase? We did validate, she said quickly. Terrence ran the test scripts. Everything passed. I glanced at Terrence. He looked like he wanted to disappear into his laptop. What test scripts? Glenn asked. The data transfer validation scripts. They confirmed all the records were copied successfully. Record count validation isn't the same as data integrity validation, I said. You can have all the right number of records and still have them pointing to each other incorrectly. Glenn's expression darkened. Did anyone review the migration plan for data integrity validation steps? Silence. I submitted a comprehensive migration specification 6 weeks ago, I said. It included validation procedures for every phase. I believe I sent it to Talia for review. I didn't believe. I knew. I had the email receipt with her red confirmation. Talia's face flushed. That document was over 300 pages. We needed something more agile, more streamlined. Agile doesn't mean skipping safety checks, Glenn said, voice flat. It means iterating quickly on validated increments. This sounds like you just skipped the validation entirely. I stayed quiet. Glenn was doing my work for me. He turned back to me. I'm putting you back on this project. Lead roll. Whatever you need, resources, access, authority, you have it. Fix this. I'll need Terrence's migration logs. All of them. And I'll need access to the production database, full admin rights. Done. Terrence, send Adele everything. Talia, make sure she has access restored immediately. Talia nodded stiffly. She wouldn't look at me. Glenn moved toward the door, then paused. One more thing. I want a postmortem on this incident. Full root cause analysis. And I want to understand how we ended up with a migration plan that eliminated critical safety procedures. He left. The room felt larger without him, and colder. I looked at Terrence. Send me the logs. All of them. Don't filter anything. He nodded, miserable. I looked at Talia. I'll need the conference room. And I'll need it quiet. She opened her mouth, closed it, then walked out without speaking. Alone with my laptop and Terrence's disaster logs, I started working. The damage was worse than I'd expected. Foreign key constraints hadn't just been disabled, they'd been completely dropped from the schema. When Terrence's scripts transferred the data, they'd applied filters that made sense for individual tables but didn't account for relationships between tables. Parent records that didn't match certain criteria got excluded, but their child records still came across, creating massive referential integrity violations. Then, when the system started throwing errors on Monday morning, someone, I suspected Talia, based on the admin logs, had attempted an automated rollback using a restore script that wasn't designed for this architecture. It pulled data from a March backup but failed to recognize that the schema had evolved significantly since then. New columns were missing. Updated constraints weren't applied. The result was a Frankenstein database, part old, part new, none of it functional. I spent Monday reconstructing the data lineage. Every table, every relationship, every missing reference. I wrote scripts to identify orphaned records and categorize them, which ones could be safely deleted, which ones needed parent records recreated, which ones represented actual data loss that would require customer contact. Yuki brought me lunch around 1 p.m. You okay? I'm fine. You look like you're planning something. I'm fixing a database. She studied my face. That's not the look of someone fixing a database. That's the look of someone fixing a problem. Smart woman, Yuki. By end of day Monday, I had a recovery plan. It was brutal, 72 hours of careful data reconstruction, manual validation of every critical table relationship, and a staged restoration process that would bring systems back online incrementally rather than all at once. Glenn called me into his office at 6 p.m. Can you actually fix this? He asked. Yes. With certainty? With reasonable certainty. There's data loss. Some customer records from the past week are compromised. We'll need to contact affected customers and have them resubmit certain information. He grimaced. How many customers? Maybe 2,000. Out of 40,000 total. That's manageable. Embarrassing, but manageable. He leaned back in his chair. Talia told me you objected to being removed from the migration project. I did. But you didn't escalate it. No. Why not? Good question. Complicated answer. Because I didn't think it would help. Talia was my manager. You were levels above me. Escalating past your direct manager rarely ends well for your career. So you just stepped aside and let them fail. I met his eyes. I documented my concerns in the original migration specification. I made that specification available to the team. What they chose to do with it was their decision. That feels like passing the buck. Maybe. Or maybe it's recognizing that expertise doesn't mean much if people don't want to listen to it. He was quiet for a moment. Then, I read your original specification this afternoon. All 347 pages. And it was thorough. Obsessively thorough. If we'd followed it, we wouldn't be in this mess. No, we wouldn't. Why didn't you fight harder for it? Would it have mattered? Talia made a choice. She wanted someone cloud native. Someone who wasn't emotionally attached to historical decisions. I let those last words sit there, exact quote, with all their absurdity. Glenn's jaw tightened. She said that to you? Among other things. He nodded slowly. Fix the database, Adele. Take whatever time you need. And when you're done, we're going to have a longer conversation about organizational structure. I worked through Monday night and most of Tuesday. Yuki helped, and Terrence too, once he realized I wasn't going to yell at him. He was actually pretty good at executing specific technical tasks when someone told him exactly what needed to happen. Just not at designing the strategy himself. By Wednesday morning, we had customer record systems back online. Sales dashboard was showing current data. Login systems were functional. Error rates had dropped to normal background levels. I slept for 4 hours on Wednesday afternoon, then came back Wednesday evening to validate the fix. Everything held. The database purred along, consistent and correct, doing exactly what it was designed to do when managed by people who understood it. Thursday morning, Glenn scheduled an all-hands meeting for our division. 200 people crammed into the largest conference room, overflow spilling into the hallway. Talia stood at the front, looking diminished somehow. Glenn stood beside her. By now you're all aware of the issues we experienced with our database migration, Glenn began. I want to address those directly and talk about some organizational changes. Here it comes, I thought. First, I want to acknowledge Adel Watson, whose work over the past 72 hours restored our systems and prevented what could have been a catastrophic failure. Adele, thank you. People turned to look at me. I nodded, uncomfortable with the attention. Second, I want to address how we got here. The migration plan that was executed eliminated critical validation steps that were present in the original specification. This wasn't a technical failure. This was a decision-making failure. Talia's face was stone. Effective immediately, I'm restructuring our engineering leadership. Adele Watson will be taking over as engineering lead for the infrastructure division. Talia Grimshaw will be transitioning to a strategic advisory role. Strategic advisory role. Corporate speak for, still employed but stripped of authority. Additionally, we're implementing new requirements for all major technical initiatives. Migration plans, architecture changes, and system overhauls will require multi-level review including senior technical staff, regardless of management hierarchy. Expertise will be valued over seniority. The meeting continued, but I stopped listening. I was too busy processing what had just happened. After the meeting, people congratulated me. I accepted it numbly. Yuki found me at my desk an hour later. You knew this would happen. I didn't know. I suspected. You could have just let it burn. Let Talia take the full fall. Instead you fixed it. People needed their data back. Customers needed the system working. That was more important than revenge. Was it, though? I thought about that. Was fixing the system really more important than watching Talia suffer the full consequences of her incompetence? Or had I simply found a more elegant form of revenge, one where I proved my value by demonstrating that the system literally could not function without me? I don't know, I admitted. Maybe I just wanted to be right. You were right. From the beginning. You tried to tell them, and they didn't listen. They listened. They just didn't care. Yuki smiled. Well, they care now. Friday afternoon, Talia packed up her office. She didn't speak to me. Didn't even look in my direction as she walked past my desk carrying a cardboard box of personal items. The poster about failing fast was rolled up and sticking out the top. Terrence stopped by around 4 p.m. Hey. Can we talk? Sure. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. For taking the assignment. For not asking for your help sooner. For all of it. You didn't do anything wrong, Terrence. You got handed an impossible task by someone who should have known better. Still. I should have pushed back. Should have admitted I was in over my head. Maybe. But that's a hard thing to do when someone's telling you you're ready for something. He nodded. For what it's worth, I learned a lot. Mostly about what not to do. That's the most valuable kind of learning. He left. I turned back to my laptop, where I was reviewing the new migration specification for our next major project, a platform upgrade scheduled for Q3. This time, I'd write it, review it, approve it, and execute it. No shortcuts. No cloud-native fresh perspectives. Just careful, methodical expertise applied to complex problems.